The Surrealist movement cannot be understood without considering its relationship with psychoanalysis. Both were interested in the internal world of the individual mind and its surprising and unexpected imagery. Their joint proclivity toward the uncanny, the disregarded, and the unconventional led to some of the most fascinating investigations of creativity. As someone who was a part of the movement, the eccentric Spanish painter Salvador Dalí held the Viennese psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud in high regard. The painter went beyond incorporating ideas propagated by psychoanalytical studies into his art. He was infatuated by Freud and his works. He even tried to contribute to psychoanalysis by writing research papers. This relationship was primarily one-sided on Dalí's side, but that was to change on the morning of 28 July 1938. The meeting of these two historical figures took place at Freud's home in London. To Dalí, this was to culminate years of planning and dreaming, brimming with emotional overtones. He had written about the event in detail in his autobiography. To talk of Salvador Dalí's interest in Freud's works as an interest would be a massive understatement. As a student in Madrid, Dalí immersed himself in Freud's writings on the unconscious, sexuality, and dreams. Freud's first significant work, The Interpretation of Dreams, made a profound impression on him. This work shifted Dalí's mind to dreams and imagination as central to human thought. The interpretation of dreams encouraged his interest in self-interpretation, not only of dreams, but of his personal experiences. He considered Freud one of the most influential figures in his life and is noted to have talked of him as a Christian would of apostles. Dalí had been trying to meet Freud for a long time. He went to Vienna several times but failed to go through with it. For Dalí, an alternative was imaginary conversations with his idol. From ailing Freud, we get a few passages in his letters about the meeting. At the time, both have gained worldwide recognition, Freud being 81 and Dalí 34 years of age. They were introduced by a mutual friend, author Stefan Zweig, who, just like Freud, lived in exile from the Austrian Nazi regime. Dalí brought his latest painting, The Metamorphosis of Narcissus, to the meeting, hoping to win Freud's approval. Dalí wanted to be recognized by Freud as a researcher of the unconscious, so he also brought him an article he had written on paranoia. During the meeting, Dalí made a small pen and ink drawing of the psychoanalyst, a work he later developed into other delicate portrait drawings. However, Dalí's enthusiasm was met with almost no answer from his hero. As Dalí exclaims in his autobiography, Freud meets all his enthusiasm with a blank stare and talks about him to Zweig as if he were not there. Even when he did talk to him, he was scant. Freud's ambiguous answer to Dalí's painting was, "What interests me in your art is not the unconscious, but the conscious," a sentence that Dalí had taken as an insult. At the end of the 19th century, a neurologist by training, Sigmund Freud, delved deep into the human mind and became the father of psychoanalysis. He earned the title for developing a method that revealed parts of the unconscious mind. His contribution to psychology, science, and culture gave us an original theory of the human mind and nature. According to it, the unconscious primarily influences the human mind, while the conscious is only secondary. This idea led Freud to discover that humans are governed by irrational and unconscious powers, flying under the radar of the mind. The dynamics of the repressed unconscious is his main contribution to psychology and anthropology. To Freud, man is a being of unfulfilled sexual, aggressive, and egoistic wishes, which are infantile, unconscious, and irrational by their nature. He is not only doomed never to fulfill these wishes, but humans are unaware of their existence. Psychoanalysis reveals a man as conflicted and divided within himself, always enduring the clash of two antagonistic forces. In his first published work, The Interpretation of Dreams, Freud showed how something as chaotic as the phenomenon of dreams has its logic, language, and meaning. While discovering the mechanisms of dreaming, the psychoanalyst opened the gate to the unconscious mind. Sigmund Freud's taste in art was far from surrealism. He admired the old masters and could not care less for avant-garde movements. His art collection was devoid of anything after the Renaissance, focusing primarily on classical ancient art. On top of that, he had a sour relationship with the leader of the Surrealist movement, André Breton. In 1921, Breton showed up uninvited at Freud's home and was received less than cordially. The two later had a tense exchange, where Breton openly mocks Freud and accuses him of stealing his ideas. Before this fallout, Breton wanted Freud to contribute to his anthology of dreams, but the psychoanalyst refused. He could not see the usefulness of a collection of dreams without the dreamer's associations and childhood memories. Freud's distaste for surrealism spread to other modernist movements as well. He compared German expressionists to lunatics and completely ignored non-mimetic abstract art. Freud had little appreciation for its aesthetic qualities of form and, more importantly, its lack of content, hidden meaning, that can be interpreted by a hermeneutic approach. In the early 1920s, on the other side of Europe from Freud's Vienna, a group of French artists led by the poet André Breton began investigating dreams and automatism. Calling themselves Surrealists, this group was formally established by publishing the Surrealist Manifesto in 1924, written by Breton. Though best known for their visuals, they were primarily interested in poetry, philosophy, and politics. Rising from the ruins of Dada, Surrealism came as a pessimistic reaction to the First World War. Feeling betrayed by the pre-war era's institutions, philosophies, and cultural heroes, they rejected tradition and conventional reason. For them, non-government and irrationality were preferred to their counterparts. So, in their revolutionary zeal, many surrealists embraced communism and Freudian theories. Freud's significance for surrealism came with his first book, The Interpretations of Dreams. Oddly, unlike Freud, surrealists weren't interested in the interpretation of dreams, but in what they were by themselves. In dreams, surrealists saw the imagination in its primitive state and its purest expression. From it, they drew inspiration for their works. A category of surrealist works known as dream paintings is where traditional illusionistic technique dominates. These paintings are not necessarily records of dreams. They have what Freud terms dream work, the coexistence of contrary elements, condensation of multiple objects or images, and the use of objects that have a symbolic value. This type of illusionistic realism is typical of the work of Salvador Dalí. The Spanish painter was a latecomer to the Surrealist movement, joining it in 1929 and providing a new focus. His paintings deliberately dramatize his own psychological state, informed by his obsession with contemporary psychology. However, by 1936, the way he publicized himself and his indifference to their political goals called for his purge from the movement. Along with other surrealists, Salvador Dalí used Freud's ideas about dream analysis as a source of his paintings to develop his renowned style of combining pictorial realism with dream-like images. Dalí's paintings are filled with Freudian themes, obsessive fear of sex, onanism, and the castration complex. However, the works do not provide us with an image from Dalí's unconscious, since he made all the interpretations and presented us with its conscious visual explanation. Many of Dalí's masterpieces, such as The Persistence of Memory, reflect an unconscious and dreamy quality. The message is that our unconscious is present in what we do in our daily lives and has more power over us. Other works, such as The Great Masturbator and The Spectre of Sex Appeal, are categorized as representations of his fantasies and fears. Now, it must be noted that even though Dalí had been deeply influenced by psychoanalysis, he established his unconventional approach and technique of making art. We cannot continue to the conclusion without at least mentioning the painting and the article Dali brought to Freud. If you are interested in a more in-depth analysis, you can check out the HENI Talks video on the subject. In Ovid's Metamorphoses, Narcissus is an exceptionally handsome youth who falls in love with his reflection in a pond. In turn, nymph Echo falls in love with him and is punished by Hera, cursed to repeat only the last words that are spoken to her. In the painting, Narcissus is represented gazing into the water on one half of the canvas. On the other half, the same form is repeated but represents the form of Narcissus as a hand clutching a cracked egg, from which a narcissus flower sprouts. The warm color of the body and the cool tones of the hand add to the sense that we are looking at complementary forms and thus advance the Narcissus and Echo theme, while the group of distant nudes between the figure and hand amplify the sexual undertones of the original myth. After he finished the painting, Dali published an essay entitled The Metamorphosis of Narcissus, in which he related that in Catalonia, the phrase "to have a bulb in the head" means to suffer from a psychological complex. The painter builds upon the phrase, "If a man has a bulb in his head, it might break into flower at any moment." Narcissus. This is probably why the narcissus flower is springing from an egg in the painting. The article he urged Freud to read at the meeting did not have anything to do with psychiatric paranoia, but critical paranoia, a method of inducing and harnessing multiple images of persecution or megalomania. He would start painting with the first image that came to mind and go on from one association to the next, lifting restrictions and flowing into delirious phenomena. However, this method is also based on Max Ernst's frottage method, which excluded all conscious guidance of reason, taste, and morals, becoming a spectator in the artistic creation. Becoming more passive, the artists discovered an intensification of visual faculties that resulted in a succession of contradictory images superimposed on one another as in a hypnagogic state. After considering the meeting and Dali's almost religious worship of Freud, we can look at the portraits of Freud that Dali made. Done in 1937 and 1938, they show perhaps a change in the way Dali viewed his hero as a direct consequence of the meeting. Dali's first portrait of Freud was based on a newspaper photograph, treating his subject more as a statue than a living person. The drawing is often described as quite static and almost inanimate. The most interesting drawings are ones from early June of 1938, in which Dali associates Freud's skull with a snail shell. The painter elaborated on this association with a story of seeing Freud's photograph in the newspaper while eating snails. This connection was interpreted in two opposite ways, either as a hostile gesture spurned by previous rejections or as a projection of anger onto Freud's face. Freud is an inconsiderable creature tucked into its shell and is perceived as insignificant for not having emerged from it to pay homage to Dali. They can also be seen as a sign of veneration, Freud's brains being equated with the insides of the snail shells that Dali is eating. Next, Dali sketched Freud during this visit and signed the portrait. In the picture, the psychoanalyst is in a pose of attentive listening, his chin propped on his hand. His eyes have limitless depth, and his age and intensity are revealed. The eyes depicted in this portrait convey a feeling of distance, reflecting Dali's perception of Freud's elusiveness. Dali describes it as an unconscious premonition of Freud's death. Zweig agreed with this notion and did not want to show the image to Freud. Dali made another final drawing of Freud, interpreted as the artist unleashing his anger. Perhaps he felt no need to hide his rage at Freud's rejection and projected his own feelings onto the dying Freud. In the end, even though Freud seemed cold and distant to Dali, the very next day he wrote to Zweig, "I really have reason to thank you for the introduction which brought me yesterday's visitors. For until then, I was inclined to look upon the Surrealists, who have apparently chosen me as their patron saint, as absolute, let us say 95%, like alcohol, cranks. That young Spaniard, however, with his candid and fanatical eyes, and his undeniable technical mastery, has made me reconsider my opinion. It would be very interesting to investigate analytically how he came to create that picture.